Thanks for coming tonight. My name is Bryn Durgan, and I'm the Director of Programming here at Bookstore One. And I know so many of you have been here many, many times before. But still, I want to thank you for being here. Of course, we sell books, but we also do a lot of events like this one that we're having here this evening. So author talks, book signings, we have live radio theater programs now, all sorts of stuff. So if you're not on our emailing list yet, then make sure you sign up downstairs. So now, our special guest is an internationally recognized expert in Chinese history who will focus this evening on the Cultural Revolution and its impact on society. As the editor of the book, As the editor of the book, he brings a nuanced understanding of what we can learn from the historical and cultural significance of this turbulent period in China's past. Again, books are available downstairs, and after tonight's talk, there will be a signing. And before I turn it over to him, and then turn him over to you for questions, let me introduce you. As a history faculty member at the University of Miami, he created and served as Director of Japanese Studies program from 1974 to 76. After changing his career path from academic history to law and graduating from Harvard Law School in 79, he practiced law in New York City for 8 years and another 8 years in Tokyo and Hong Kong, where he was head of legal affairs for the Asia Pacific region for Morgan Stanley and then Credit Suisse First Boston. He returned to Harvard in 96 as a senior associate of the program on US-Japan relations before moving to Harvard Law School as associate director of the program on international finance systems from 98 to 2003, where he co-founded its Japan-US Financial Symposium, the premier annual bilateral forum of the past 26 years. He's a graduate of the University of Chicago, PhD in history from UC Berkeley, and a JD from Harvard Law School. He was a visiting foreign scholar at Kyoto University from 69 to 71 under both Fulbright Ford Foreign Area Fellowships. As a business entrepreneur, among other projects, he was a founder and CEO of a biotech company called Crop Tech LLC, a founder and senior executive of a mobile app technology platform company called Tora LLC, and a founder and senior executive of a minerals distribution company called White Gold Mountain Partners LLC, which was a unique business joint venture between a small US group and North Korea from 97 to 2002. Since his retirement from full-time professional activities, he's lived in Longboat Key in Sarasota, Florida, spending summers in Chautauqua with his partner Georgia Court for the last 7 years. So join me in welcoming the talented Robin Radin.
Great to see all of you here from so many different parts of my life. George's son says that I have more degrees than a thermometer, which I take as a compliment. I don't know how to
Are some of them negative?
Yeah. Right.
Below zero?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I appreciate your all being here from, as I said, from so many parts of my life, including Peter Wang, who's over there on my right, who I've known since, 84 or 83? 84. And through whom I met his dad, who is the originator of the project that led to this book, and the translator and co-editor, and his picture is shown on the inside cover, at least, of this hardback version. But I have a picture that shows him on a trip that the last trip we were together in October 2017 in a remote place in Guizhou province. Does anyone know where Guizhou province other than Peter? Well, you do, yeah. And very remote province of China that was considered kind of forbidden even during imperial times because it was so dangerous with very steep mountains and valleys, and the armies were fearful of ambush by tribal peoples. The highest concentration of tribal peoples, Miao and Hmong and Dong, and many different tribes concentrated in Guizhou province. And my co-editor who originated this project, Wang Youfen, and here he is, and a lot of this talk will be about him. I'll circulate this. Extraordinary personality and great influence on me, and a dear friend here is getting some ceremonial wine at kind of a Disneyland version of the extraordinary tribal culture of that village. Peter was along on that trip, and we went to a lot of different villages that weren't fake.
Right.
Like this one, which attracted Chinese tourists, not foreigners, to come and see performances of the local arts. And this trip was really thanks to Youfen, who organized it because of my interest in collecting tribal textiles and costumes. And I found one which I had planned to bring, but it's just too fragile. But if you're interested, I'm happy to talk about that. And then here's Peter's mom. Unfortunately, Peter's dad passed away in 1990, March, when we had just completed the text for this book. But his mom passed away just several months ago. And here she is proudly seeing the book at age, what? How old was she?
96.
96. So, by finishing this book, we were able to bring her some obvious pleasure, and she was a career journalist herself, actually, and just absolutely lovely woman. And the Wang family, you can get a sense, sort of adopted me, and I adopted them, and we became very close. In any case, how did this book come about? How did Wang Youfen and I become involved together in this book development project that deals with a program of Mao Zedong called the Churching movement or program, also known as the educated, translated, it means educated youth, also known as sent down youth program that involved 18 million Chinese during the 60s and through the late 70s of 79. And had an enormous impact on the thought and behavior of Chinese today, because that generation lost its opportunity for education by being sent into exile from cities to be, quote, re-educated by the peasants with the motive of transforming them into revolutionary successors of Mao Zedong and the other Communist Party leaders. That was his vision that led to the creation and the persistence and implementation of this program. Ai Weiwei, who you see on the back cover, most famous Chinese artist and perhaps one of the most famous in the world, read this book and wrote a wonderful blurb that said that this program destroyed rationality, severed people's historical memory and rational thinking, and deeply affected the way Chinese people think and behave today. And that's obviously a good reason why it's compelling to know about it and to read it. In the book is, as I'll discuss, 42 original memoirs of young people who directly experienced this exile. So we're going to talk about, how these memories and stories enrich our understanding of how Chinese think and feel about their lives in the world today, and how this book can also help us understand our own world and lives, and the impact of censorship and book bans and school captures and of lower schools, public schools, and colleges and universities. We have that right here with New College down the street, and the suppression of views and facts that one group may find uncomfortable. What motivated Mao Zedong and other Chinese revolutionary leaders to pursue not only this program, but waves of attacks on intellectuals, of which Wang Youfen, Peter's father, was a victim, as you'll hear in more detail. And Peter went along for the ride as a young person. And when we get to questions and answers, I think they'll be available if you're interested to hear his personal experience. Also, as we'll discuss, there's one story that really is extraordinary about a rebellion and hunger strike of young people in late 1978, December and January 79, that actually was successful, 10 and a half years before they shot down the student rebels in Tiananmen Square. So how did that happen? What was the context for that success, circumstance? To talk about the book so that you understand the subject matter, during a span of 17 years, from 62 to 79, close to 18 million Chinese educated youth, about one half of a whole generation of literate teenagers from Chinese cities were sent off to remote places in the Chinese countryside, sometimes for over a decade or more, to be re-educated in order to learn from the peasants. Quote, these millions of kids who were the subject of this massive program of social engineering are known in China as Churching, or educated youth, because they were literate middle and high school graduates from Chinese cities. They're also known, as I said, as sent down youth. While we know, more familiar with the Red Guards in the Cultural Revolution, among Westerners, this experience, this Churching experience, was far more impactful for China historically. It shaped the lives, brought the thought and behavior of an entire generation of Chinese, including China's current president, Xi Jinping. who was a Churching, was a sent-down youth. He had certain advantage because his father was a vice premier, and he figured out how to use his place of exile as a base to build his network in the party and ultimately to rise up to be supreme leader. As a demographic phenomenon, the Churching program has been characterized by scholars as the largest compulsory population shift in human history. I'm not sure about that characterization, but it was significant, and the Chinese government characterized it in that way when foreign scholars came to call after the opening of China in the 70s. But it was not carried out, as we'll discuss, to reverse the usual tide of population shift from rural places to urban areas, which is typical in developing countries. But as I mentioned, this thesis that it was all about managing development was the thesis of the first book that was published about the Churching program, published by Professor Thomas Bernstein of Columbia in 1977. The book is entitled Up to the Mountains and Down to the Villages, the Transfer of Youth from Urban to Rural China. But he performed his study before China was accessible. So all of it was secondhand, and that was his thesis, which is really missed the point. Rather, the historian Michel Bonin, whose foreword is in our book, he is the leading historian, and his view was that the motivation for the program evolved with circumstances on the ground over time, but it was mainly carried out to fulfill the ideological obsession of Mao Zedong. Namely, he aimed to convert city kids who, in his view, were ideologically corrupted by conventional learning and also distracted by material advantage, into passionate revolutionaries, successors of him and his generation of revolutionary leaders and founders of the People's Republic. By witnessing the experience and experiencing class struggle from the perspective of the peasants, the sent-down youth would be equipped to carry on permanent revolution that Mao believed was necessary for his revolution to be sustained and to achieve its utopian goals. The history of the Churching episode has been very well presented by Professor Bonin, who I recruited to write the foreword in his book, The Lost Generation, subtitled The Rustication of China's Educated Youth. Unusual word, but it describes what happened when they were sent to the remote countryside to become rural hicks, without really having any preparation for that. And the stories that you'll read among the 42 describe that experience vividly, and in a nuanced and emotional way. So they're fascinating vignettes and firsthand experience. Wang Youfen, Peter's dad, was driven to undertake this project by the conviction that the world needed to know about this large-scale deportation in China, which, although not as deadly as the gulags of the Soviet Union or the concentration camps of Nazi Germany, disrupted the lives and had a lifelong impact on a whole generation of Chinese urban youth. That was his view. We discussed it. I mean, I thought the analogy with Nazi Germany and the Soviet gulags was exaggerated, but he stuck to that, even though the details and the consequences were not as extreme. Nevertheless, he thought the world needed to know, and Chinese needed to know more about their past, and the way to achieve that was through a book, getting a book published in English that would ultimately perhaps find its way back to China. And although that's less of a prospect these days, it's still something on the table. After Mao's death, the regime abandoned this policy, but many of those who managed to return home, and a minority who were compelled to stay in the countryside, females who were forced into marriages with local rustics, had no choice. They remained there. They're still struggling to survive the lost opportunity and displacement they suffered in their educational and career development, and in their minds psychologically. And it's been pointed out that even though this experience was direct for that generation, their deprivation influenced their progeny to be, pressured to achieve academically and career-wise, and it is something that helps us understand the mentality of the current generation that is leading China. So the book, as you'll see, is organized into 5 different parts: life and work, relationships with local people, love and marriage, family, the Go Home campaign, and I'll talk about that in a minute, and confessions and reflections, people who did terrible things, driven by their indoctrination and their group think, and regret those things that they did. Each of these short works was selected because it revealed a distinctive aspect of the Qing experience, and Wang Youfen and I worked together to select the best, revise them through exhaustive polished editing, so that each story worked as a literary short story or as a credible reportage that would deliver maximum emotional impact. Youfen's insights as a world-class translator and editor, of course, amplified, were essential to the results that you see in this book. He, and this was because, among other things, he had himself directly experienced political struggle and physical exile firsthand. As a writer, editor, publisher, as an educated intellectual, his adult life and career paralleled the arc of the Chinese Revolution and the episodes of revolutionary Chinese history. The book, which was his final life's project, and into which he invested his experience and wisdom, is a legacy of his contributions to understanding China's revolution and regime and our own times and challenges. And I'm gonna focus on his biography because it's extraordinary, and it tells helps you understand the episodes of Chinese revolutionary history which he experienced. When he was 10 years old, living in Wuhan, the Japanese army besieged his home city, and he and his family were forced to flee, to escape, and they went to Sichuan province, which I think is the largest province in the southwest, including Chongqing and Chengdu, and panda bears actually are famously lodged there, come from Chengdu Panda Research Center, which I visited. So they fled by boat and on foot, and along the way in Chongqing, his father contracted cholera and died. His father was a kind of an elite intellectual, chief financial officer for a large textile mill, but had to flee for his life. The family settled in Chengdu, and he remembered as a child selling some of the family heirlooms in front of the Taoist temple in Chengdu to buy food. In 1945, after the Japanese surrendered, Youfen was accepted as a student at Nanking University in agricultural economics, and he chose that field because it had the highest incidence of students being sent overseas for education. He excelled in English and became a leader. Actually, he was elected the student body president of the university. And in that capacity, he spoke out about official corruption of the nationalist government, which was lodged at its headquarters in Nanking, and was soon approached by the underground Communist Party and solicited to join. In 1948, he helped organize a student protest in Nanjing that called for an immediate end to the war with the communists. And in December that year, 1948, he was arrested and jailed, but was released from prison a few months later as part of an amnesty declared by the interim successor to Chiang Kai-shek, Lee Cheng-ring. After his release, Youfen went underground back to his hometown in Wuhan, and then following the founding of the PRC on October 1st, 1949, he received intensive training in journalism and more advanced training in English. And at 22 years of age, he was one of the first recruits of the International Press Bureau of the PRC for English language publications. So he was there, at the founding, maybe a dozen other international journalists, specialists. Of course, he was identified professionally from that time as an expert and as an intellectual, and he was a beneficiary, but also a victim of that identity in a regime led by Mao Zedong, who disparaged and stigmatized intellectuals and idealized his own personal model of education at what he called the University of Green Woods, namely, you know, the forests of guerrilla fighters. Robin Hood kind of image. The haunts of bandits and revolutionary guerrilla fighters. In 1957, the famous 100 Flowers movement invited intellectuals to speak out their criticisms of the Communist Party, and they were exposed and rewarded by being branded as rightists, and he was demoted from his party status. His party membership was put under probation, but then he was brought back in 58 and 60. He was a reporter and editor of the newly formed English language weekly news magazine modeled on Time magazine, namely the Beijing Review, which was distributed in English weekly internationally. He also became the head of English publications at the Foreign Languages Press, which was the PRC's press for foreign language publications. 68, at the height of the Cultural Revolution, he was accused of being a capitalist roader and a spy for Chiang Kai-shek, publicly humiliated. He told me about his personal experience during that time, you know, when his subordinates that he had trained became top dogs in the office, and he was consigned to clean the toilets and wash the floors. And he painfully recollected that nobody ever apologized for this cruel treatment, you know, even though he came back to be on top. In 69, he and his family, including Peter, were expelled from Beijing. This was in the midst, the height of the Cultural Revolution, sent down to a small village in Henan province to be re-educated by the peasants. On the banks of the Yellow River, small village. And Peter was, what, 11 years old?
Yeah.
They lived in a mud house and learned how to farm and raise chickens for 2.5 years. To keep warm in the winter, he and his 10-year-old son, Peter, were forced to pull a half ton of coal by sledge 30 miles every 2 weeks to heat the house. 72, Youfen was called back to Beijing to resume his work at the Beijing Review as deputy chief editor. 84, he came to the U.S. Together with Zhao Ziyang, who was then party secretary, and in that his capacity as the senior, you know, reporter, he interviewed Henry Kissinger and Brzezinski. 86, he came back to the U.S. to set up an office in New York for the Beijing Review, and that's when I met him. We became friends from that time. 1989, he was then publisher and editor-in-chief of the Beijing Review, and the review supported the democracy principles in several of its editorials, and as a result, he was persecuted again, stripped of his positions, his party membership, and forced into early retirement, luckily with his full benefits, which was a great thing. Starting in 1990, for the next 28 years of his life, he was a freelance journalist, editor, translator, and publisher, and he said often this was the best time of his life. He told me often. And actually, family moved I moved to Tokyo, and the family moved into my brownstone in Park Slope for, I don't know, a couple of years in the early 90s. He spent those final 28 years as a activist dissident under the radar, just a barrel of energy. He saw in '92 Bill Clinton was running for president. Chinese didn't know anything about Clinton, so he translated and published a Chinese version of Jim Moore's Clinton biography, Clinton, Young Man in a Hurry. In the following year, he translated a book about by Mark Perry about the CIA, the lost days of the CIA. Popular interest about U.S.-Soviet spy competition was intense in China. In 2003, he was asked to assist with the preparation of a volume in a series developed by Yale University Press on the culture and civilization of China. And that project was floundering because the Chinese authors of a very esoteric field of art history were not able to communicate to an untrained audience. So he volunteered to intervene and mastered, the language of Chinese calligraphy, which is highly metaphorical, and he produced this book. And it has here translated and edited by Wang Youfen. And the book won the award in 2008 by the American Publishers Association. It's the best book of the year in both humanities and art history and art. Extraordinary achievement. It's still like a standard work. So he was very active. He started a publishing company in 2011, published 10 books, translated nonfiction books, translated from English. One about mental health, had an impact on Chinese legislation, treatment of mentally ill. And in 2016, he came upon, at age, he was 88, he came upon this project, the Churching project. There was a group pursuing a plan for a documentary film, but he met in Chengdu a man who had written a memoir about his extraordinary experience as a sent-down youth. The man was Youfen, and I showed you this picture of Youfen in Guizhou province. But along on that trip was Peter, and also the author of that story, a guy named Youfen, who had led a rebellion and a hunger strike in late '78 and January '79 in Yunnan province on an industrial farm that planted and grew rubber plants near the Burmese border. And he was still operating under the blacklist. It was difficult for him to travel without trouble that we observed along the way, getting train tickets and so on. In any case, Youfen's story, which you can read an edited version in this book, narrates how in December '78, these industrial farm Zhixing from Chengdu and from other Chinese cities were told to gather for an announcement at their workplace, and they were informed. And this, the context was the aftermath of the Cultural Revolution that wrecked the economies of Chinese cities. The whole country was in turmoil, but they were informed on that occasion that their status as Zhixing was hereby canceled, and that they would remain industrial farmers or whatever they were doing. And across the country, millions and millions of these young people, they would remain where they were for the rest of their lives. Well, this group was aggregated in a group of 5,000. There were other adjoining farms that made up, in that province, about 100,000 of these Zhixing. Yefeng came to be a leader of his group and determined to say no. They were not enlisted to spend their lives. Even soldiers were allowed to go home. As they shouted, "We have been here for 8 years. Even the war against Japan ended after 8 years. As veterans, we should be demobilized, sent home, give back our urban residency." And you couldn't go anywhere in China without, a registration, residency card. And give back our urban residency status, give back our youth. We'll fight to the death in order to go home. So they complain that they have been lied to by the recruiters for this program, and that now they're being forced into permanent exile. Yefeng became the leader. The local party tried to trap him in all kinds of ways, brand him a thief, and, abuser, and, but they didn't succeed. He was too smart, and he had a good group protecting him. And he took out a copy of the PRC Constitution, and he read aloud the provision on the rights of citizens to demonstrate and strike. I mean, it's in their Constitution as it is in ours. And he was going to exercise and educate his group in that right. Give back our urban residency. So this spread like wildfire to other adjoining farms, and a committee was formed for a general strike. And by January 5th, early in '79, thousands of Zhixing had streamed by foot from up to 20 miles away to gather at that farm. The next day, a first batch of over 200 male hunger strikers were selected from hundreds of volunteers, and the local officials were very upset and plotting to intervene militarily. One of the members of his group had been a signalman in the army, and he had the number of the Central Committee switchboard in Beijing. He called up and reported on what was happening. And first, he was told, you're engaging in sedition, and you're going to be punished. But then when he got the drift of what was happening, that it was spreading, and that this could happen, spread, diffuse all over the country, they decided to send one of the generals from the Long March to intervene. And this guy, Zhou Fan, showed up several days later and appeared before them to tell them to get back to work. The authorities weren't going to stand for this. Well, it turned out that he was the father of 4 sent down youth himself. And when he repeated the official line, these strikers shouted back, joined by all of their followers, "We veterans want to be demobilized. We want to go home, give back our urban residency, give back our youth. We will fight to the death to go home." Suddenly, very dramatically, one of the female Churching threw herself on the ground in front of the old general, started wailing, and the crowd joined in. And the story describes how Zhao Fan, the Long March general, sobbed loudly over the microphone, his tears spilling down his cheeks. "Churching comrades," he said, "I have 3 sons working as Churching and a daughter in a factory. As a Churching parent, I understand and sympathize with you. Your demands are legitimate. Your wish can be realized." So he spent another several days investigating, collecting information, went back to Beijing, and remarkably, the State Council determined to completely reverse the policy and change the course of Chinese history and allow these kids to go home. In retrospect, this was no time in Chinese history to allow an escalation of a domestic uprising. And the State Council was very worried about the geopolitical context. And what was that context? Well, it was fraught for China. January 1, 79, was the date scheduled to commence normal diplomatic relations with the United States of America. And there were American diplomats right there in the same province in Kunming, in the capital city. At the same time, the tensions between Vietnam and China were escalating right there on the border of Yunnan and Vietnam, just very nearby these farms. So this was not a good time. And of course, the news was spreading like wildfires. So, this is, I'm going to wind up, but there's a lot of wonderful stories in this book that give you a vivid, direct experience of those who were there, suffered in various ways, young women who were abused, raped, forced into marriages because they faced starvation and torture. Very poignant stories. A story about a young fellow who composed an anthem for Churching, and it was picked up by the Soviet Union. Competition between the Soviets and the Chinese was escalating, and the Soviets picked up this anthem, and they had it recorded by a male, military chorus, and broadcast back to China. And he was suddenly informed that his little, folk song was now subject of, national humiliation, and eventually he was arrested and sentenced to death, which was finally commuted after 9 years in prison. So these are the kind of extraordinary tales. So with that, I will open the floor to questions, comments, and
What questions do you have? Thanks so much, Robin.
sure.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Ed?
Robin,
Yes.
wonderful talk, thank you. There's a certain irony. There's a certain irony in your talk. And the movement was labeled Churching. Not pronouncing it perfectly.
Yeah.
We've just come through an election where the Kaching movement won. So I just thought you'd find that ironic. But how do you take a city like Shanghai, where my wife and I have been,
Yeah.
and you go there now, it's an amazingly sophisticated city. It is sophisticated like New York is sophisticated. How
Well,
did China move from the devastation of World War II, the uprisings that you're talking about, to cities that are incredibly sophisticated?
it took, it took Deng Xiaoping to mobilize the energy of at least a well-educated urban population to change their focus from ideology to building wealth. To get rich is glorious, he said, and he said it doesn't matter if you're a white cat or a black cat, as long as you can catch mice.
Which that was true here.
Yeah. we welcome you, to lend your energy to build the economy. And of course, you reflect on the recent election, and it's not far-fetched to say that our parties lent a hand to enable China to join the WTO, to benefit from our outsourcing of our manufacturing capacity, to their lower wage but highly skilled workforce, and we invested enormous capital, as did other advanced countries. So it's important to understand the linkage and dependency that we have, and the causality of that extraordinary development, rapid industrial economic advancement. It's a global dynamic, and without that, and we just, some of us politically have paid a price for the legacy of that program. Just read Joe Biden's discussion, his reflections on what he's tried to do to reverse that model and to build the economy from the ground and the middle out rather than from the top down. So, all of this is linked and should be appreciated. China is not out there, it's very much right here. And we need to understand. Yes?
Yeah, well, I haven't read the book yet, but it's on my table. And, but I have a question. They took that 18 million youth at one point, redistribute them around the country. Did they continue to, I'm sorry, did they continue to feed into that system during that 30-year period? In other words, was it a constant flow of people from urban areas to rural? Or
No.
was it just that one big block?
No, yeah, I mean, of course, the scholar Michel Bonin provides the statistical data
Right.
and the dynamic of what drove it, and it was heavily concentrated, you know, in the period of the Cultural Revolution.
Okay.
And you know, Mao mentioned the Red Guards, and he was alarmed by their wreaking havoc in the cities, and one of his methods to cope with that was to tell them, do your revolutionary duty and get the hell out of here
That's right.
to the countryside and show, you know, your mettle as revolutionary successors by learning from the peasants. And so, you know, a lot of them shipped out at that time. During the Cultural Revolution, you know, there were recruiters at factories and schools. You know, well, you see the picture on the cover of the book, which is thanks to Peter's work,
The hijack, yeah.
and that's from a museum in what, Chengdu? In Chengdu, about the Churching experience. You know, they're being sent off, like, you know, to the front to fight patriotically. But, you know, when they got there, it was a different story. They were out of, you know, fish out of water. They didn't know, you know, how to cope. And the stories tell you about that experience.
Not always welcome.
Right. Well, because they were
Rarely.
literally taking food out of the mouths of the peasants, who were largely subsistence, or in many cases subsistence. And how are they going to feed these kids who didn't, you know, have a clue about cultivating anything? They were just consumers.
And there was language problems and
Yeah.
cultural.
Robin,
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Today, we have the same problem of the people in the urban area don't understand the rural area. And it's a price just paid by the Democratic Party, who thought that as elite and urban people, they understood they were the party for the workers or the peasants. So what could be done to mix the experience, to create the big answer has been, we should have a national service, and that will bring some convergence and understanding.
Well, the military served that function, to bring
Right,
people
and
from
very
diverse
rural.
backgrounds together and
Right.
to understand each other and relate. You're right, but we don't have
We
that kind
won't
of.
do it this the way that it's done,
Yeah.
but we should think about how that might be accomplished.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, my father was in the Civil Conservation Corps in the 30s, and he was taken from Cincinnati, Ohio, and sent to somewhere in Wyoming. And they were allegedly going to build some kind of bridge, but it was very disorganized. But it was the same sort of thing. You took kids from the cities who were unemployed, I think he was 15 or 16, ship them to an urban or a rural area where they're supposed to be learning a skill. Well, luckily for him, he was only in it a short time. but his experiences, I'm sure, are quite the same.
And Woody Guthrie sang about.
Oh, he
you know,
certainly did,
Grand Coulee
yeah.
Dam Project and all
Yes.
that.
We have time for one
Bring
last,
people
one
together.
last question
One
before
last-
book
one
signing.
last. I'm the last. I want to thank you for telling this in stories that are so accessible to make us understand, because it's very hard to understand Chinese history. And within the stories, you have a song. And I brought my two neighbors, and they are
Oh.
both from China. And driving here, she sang me that song. She learned it from her older brother and sister. And when she was a little girl, they sang that to her. She sang it in the car to me
From
on the way.
that, from that period?
She,
From
put the
that-
microphone up, she'll sing it for you.
Okay.
Yeah, she's not a singer.
Translate.
The anthem is what you call it, the anthem.
Yeah,
of
the
teaching.
answer. Oh, you're kidding.
This is
I have
the
the
song
text.
that
The
you
one
referred
from-
It
to.
makes
I have
it,
the text.
it makes it so real.
I have the text.
The Russian song
yeah,
that was
I'll-
translated. Oh.
Yeah.
Recite the text.
告别了妈妈，再见吧故乡，金色的样子将白，是我可爱的南京古城，是我的家乡。
It makes it so real.
Yeah, you know,
This is real.
I didn't plan this.
I think that's a beautiful way to wrap it up. I'm aware.
He was just
Can
gonna
I-
translate
Oh, of
it.
course. Go ahead. Yes,
Song
of
is.
course.
Yeah, let me,
Yeah.
I have the translation. White clouds soaring in the blue sky. The ancient, lovely city of Nanjing nestles by the side of the beautiful Yangtze. There I was born and brought up. Oh, the great rainbow-like bridge thrusts at the clouds to reach the other side of the Yangtze River. Mount Zedong, magnificent and mighty, lies near my hometown like a crouching tiger. I say goodbye to Mom, bidding farewell to my hometown. The golden times of my school days are all gone, leaving only a paper album from my youth. Ah, the road that lies ahead is so rugged and so long. I leave my footprints, both deep and shallow, on remote alien lands. Rising with the sun and coming back with the moon, I undertake the heavy job of repairing the globe. This was an expression that was popular, repairing the globe. Fulfilling this glorious sacred duty now turns out to be my fate.
Wow. Thank you.
Thank you all. Please read the book and be in touch.
Yeah, and more copies are available downstairs if you haven't gotten yours yet. And Robin will hang out a little bit and sign
Sure.
some books up here.